Hi, I'm Saumitra Jha, and I'm going to introduce the theme with my colleague Oyebola on ethnic diversity and nation building. So, what we are particularly interested in is this question of whether we can break through what we're going to call an ethnic growth trap. I asked ChatGPT to portray what an ethnic growth trap looks like, and this is what it came up with. So, it looks like a tug of war, apparently, according to AI, but I think there might be more going on than that. So let me just start by saying, showing you some stylized facts, things that you're all very familiar with. If you look at some people might call the era of development, from 1960 to 2014, this massive period when we learned so much about how to do things, there's so much technical progress. There's this kind of striking thing where a lot of the world actually did develop quite fast during this period. But, as many of you, of course, I don't need to tell anyone here, there was also a lot of places, countries in the world that started off poor and remained poor. Many of them some of them actually got poorer. And many of these, as are names you're very familiar with, like the DRC, like the Central African Republic, that really, were heavily conflict-ridden. So, poverty and conflict, of course, are intrinsically related. Now, again, a picture we've seen a lot about the patterns of civil conflict. One map I created was actually of the history of it from 1945 onwards, and you can see civil conflicts continue, but it's not just a phenomenon limited to certain parts of the world. You see them in some places, increasingly in others as well. So I think it's important to think about what the ethnic dimension, which is really the kind of the core of the theme that we're going to be talking about today. And there's this classic summary article by Alessina Ferrara, which has aged well, I would say, basically kind of establishing the stylized fact that if you look at economic GDP growth or development, ethnic fractionalization has tended to reduce it. However, there's an interaction with the log of initial income. So, the way to think about that is countries which are poor and ethnically fractionalized tend to not grow, and so they tend to remain poor. But when you get rich, ethnic fractionalization can actually be a benefit. And so so there's this idea potentially that if we can just break through what might be an ethnic growth trap, that what might seem like a liability when countries are poor becomes an advantage as economic development occurs, right? So, related to this, of course, is a classic paper which all of you are familiar with from Montalvo and Reno Carroll, where they look at ethnic polarization, which is strongly related to ethnic fractionalization, but there are some differences. And what they find in that paper is that if you're polarized, in other words, that if ethnic groups are approaching two groups with parity that are closely identified within themselves, you tend to get more conflict. Now, of course, if you look at the places which are ethnically polarized but have, there's also places like Belgium and Switzerland up there as well. Not surprisingly, our team leaders are perhaps from those places, and which have the potential, have these ethnic divisions, but have been quite outstanding in terms of historical stability and development as well. So one question is, how do we get into an environment where we can sustain ethnic differences, even high levels of ethnic polarization, while being able to grow? So I think there's a lot of commonality with Laura's presentation just now, where the way we think about it is potentially there is an ethnic growth trap present there, that you see kind of this feedback between polarization and conflict. You see a feedback, a lot of literature mentioned that ethnic fractionalization and polarization tends to lead to low public goods provision. And these things, of course, conflict often destroys public goods. Low public goods provision and ineffective governance will lead to less development. Of course, these things are connected as well. So if it's the case that countries that are poor and ethnically divided tend to remain conflictual and remain poor, how can we kind of get out of that? And I think that's the first thing that we're going to raise. The second thing is, how can we use ethnic diversity potentially as a way of getting out of it? So, so I think the ethnic dimension has different components than I think the pure institutional dimension that which you're trying to emphasize in this theme. So this is actually my final slide, but it's like a kind of a busy one. But the way we think about it is that there are 3 pillars that we want to explore in this theme. One is, what are the roots of ethnic division? And what are the sources of ethnic polarization in different contexts? And how do those sources, those historical sources, actually affect the opportunities that different countries and places have for breaking out of the ethnic growth trap? If it's the case that the ethnic divisions come out of artificial historical borders, that's going to have a very different consequence to whether the ethnic divisions came out of past migration patterns or disease or ethnic or economic activities which led different groups to interact and be present in different places. So understanding the causes in different contexts is really going to be crucial for understanding the solutions in those contexts. So, in particular, one thing I've been very interested in is, could you leverage inter-ethnic complementarities in order to kind of break out of that ethnic conflict, break out of things coming out of history. A second part of it is, when and how, even if you have ethnic divisions, they might not organize in such a way which leads to conflict. So where is the internal ethnic organization emerging which leads countries to potentially be divided and conflictual? And could those organizations' structures be leveraged, again, in a more positive manner towards economic development rather than inter-ethnic conflict? And so that's another aspect of the first pillar. The second pillar that we're interested in is strengthening governance. So given the situation that the ethnic divisions exist, oftentimes I think one thing unique to ethnically divided societies is you'll often have this phenomenon of what some people call ethnic cronyism, that minority groups which are vulnerable see themselves as having little option often but to buy protection. And you see this emergence of situations where ethnic minorities are basically transferring outside the government system to various dictators and other rulers because they're the ones who can protect them from potential violence. Now that's going to undermine democracy and other institutions, but it's also going to lead to resentment and potentially conflict as well. So with the ethnic dimension then, can we think about other approaches which can leverage the organization that groups have in order to buy protection, in order to mitigate those incentives such that they might actually be pro-development rather than investing in local public goods projects as some communities do, rather than bribing various strong men and strong people more generally. A second aspect of this is this question of how effective can power sharing or other types of mediation activities be in mitigating these conflicts in environments where ethnicity is already salient. And so, of course, people in this room have done a lot of contributions in this area. We think this is something that we need to explore more as well. The third pillar is really about trying to understand people-to-people relationships rather than beyond the governance. So to what extent can networks and interpersonal contacts potentially be leveraged in such a way to mitigate ethnic conflict? And, could we use kind of financial ways to have people interact virtually? Does it have to be person to person? Can we construct teams which are cooperative in certain ways? Can we use other types of incentives to bring people together in such a way that there's more to be gained from being together than being apart from each other? And further, can we leverage sort of leadership structures and traditional other networks in order to do so more effectively as well? So those are the 3 pillars. These are the things which we think are most promising. This is not exhaustive of what we had in our pathfinding outline. We think climate, for example, is going to affect these things in an important way as well. But this is where we're going, and obviously we appreciate any thoughts and comments as we develop this theme. With that, thank you very much.